All right, I got it. Sorry
Okay,
about
thank
that.
you.
Okay, this is perfect timing still. We have all night, right? Um, all right. So before we get to the actual presentation, I just wanted to make sure that folks who may be triggered by some of the images have a chance to log off before we begin. Because some of the images can be very disturbing, as well as the videos that we'll be sharing clips of. All right. So Legacy's pillars are history, healing, and hope. In order to fully understand the breadth of our work, we would need more than just 30 minutes today. In fact, this could very well be a course of its own, or at the very least, part of Southeast Asia studies. So I know that there are some professors on here, so just putting a plug in there. For this evening's presentation, we'll structure it using these three pillars of legacies, starting with the overall history, how we're collectively healing and paving the way forward for hope. To talk about the history is to retrieve something from our past and that of our own family. It's a huge act of restoration. Sometimes it's a chaotic restoration, sometimes it's a calming and healing one. And not just for ourselves, but for those that we connect with, our collective network. Some of what I'll be retrieving can be deeply painful, and the images that I will share may be hard for some of you to watch and experience. I want to give folks who may not want to be triggered just another opportunity to step away from the screen. So just to reiterate what I believe Izzy shared, unexploded ordnance or UXO, it's an explosive weapons, bombs, bullets, shells, grenades, landmines, naval mines, anything that did not explode when it was first employed. And these still pose a threat and potentially many decades after it was discarded. So how did all this happen? Why did the US drop so much bomb on a country that is 42 times smaller than our own country, the United States? Why did we do this when we were not at war with Laos? So the official answer is to destroy the supply lines of the North Vietnamese soldiers. The US dropped over 2.1 million tons of unexploded ordnance, of ordnance, in a span of 580,000 bombing mission. So that's 580,000 bombing missions, 24 hours a day, every 8 minutes, for 9 straight years. To understand this, we must look at what was happening during this period in the region and even prior. So just think of a Cold War period, right? During this time, there was this big struggle of the superpower trying to fend over territories that were once colonized. So this particular region that we're talking about here today is Southeast Asia. You'll see where my cursor is, right? So Southeast Asia, if the United States did not act, and this is coming from the perspective of those who were in government during that time, it would fall under communist rule. So then Southeast Asia really became this proxy war for the world superpowers. Before we get into that though, let me just set the stage for you again as it relates to the Vietnam War, right? The Vietnam War, or as what they called in Vietnam, the American Aggression War, was raging during this time. The US had a base in Thailand officially, and it was around right here in Thailand. But this was not enough because if you recall from that period, America was losing the war. In April of 2008, the National Security Archives published further details of how the American Special Forces began training Laotian tribesmen in unconventional warfare as early as 1959. So I want you to remember this. 1959, the US was already in Laos. So the CIA had troops training the mountain tribes in this region here. And they were actually considering, in addition to bombs, using nuclear weapons during this time. But let me fast forward to 1962. So in 1962, this is known as the Geneva Agreements, right? 14 countries gather in Geneva, the United States included in this, signing a treaty saying that all of these 14 countries were going to leave Laos alone and make Laos a neutral country. So right after that, the CIA looked to Laos as a strategy and set up a secret base. And the secret base is right here, like in the mountain regions. And this is the reason why we call it the secret war, because officially we were not in Laos. As a matter of fact, this is under 3 presidents, Nixon, Kennedy, and Johnson, all knew about the CIA operation, but officially to the American people, we were never there. Now, if Laos and Vietnam fell to communist rule, that would mean the end of control and possible influence that the US would have in the region. Now, let's look at Laos's history. Laos's history, it's very complex, right? Like Laos, as you can tell, it's landlocked. And it is no stranger to foreign invasions. The country has been colonized by France, occupied by Japan, and it has a long history of subjugation and exploitation. Pretty much, if you put yourself in the shoes of Laotians during this time, they're feeling this pain and anger from being colonized, being controlled by foreign forces, that when this all erupted, it looked like America was going to be the next one to control Laos. So this gave rise to revolutionaries forming the party of the Pathet Lao. So the Pathet Lao officially is the Communist Party. And on the other side, Laos was still under royal a monarchy, right? So civil war broke out because of the two sides. So, okay, I'm just gonna pause there and just to recap real quickly. First, there was a secret war where the US was dropping bombs onto Laos in order to destroy Vietnamese supply route right here along what was once called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Second, within Laos itself, there was the struggle between the royal party as well as the Pathet Lao, which was backed by the communists. So pretty complex, right? Now, I mentioned earlier that over 2.1 million tons of bombs were dropped. And of all the different types of bombs that were dropped, there was 3,000-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs, 5,000-pound bombs, all different types of bombs. But the most that were dropped were these 270 million of these that are called bombies that I'm holding in my hand. And about 30% of these failed to detonate, leaving approximately 80 million cluster munitions still on the ground. And one of the quotes that I remember the most, I'm going to recommend this book to you, At War with Asia by Noam Chomsky. It's a quote by the Secretary of State during that time, Henry Kissinger. He basically said, bomb anything that moves. So that means that there was no, it doesn't matter that there were innocent villagers there. The order was to bomb anything. And the pilots were just dropping loads and loads of bombs because they couldn't land their plane with a plane load full of bombs when they were flying back to Thailand, their base. So, I mentioned earlier as well that many of these bombs that were coming down, you might be wondering to yourself, why didn't they detonate, right? To give you just like a brief background on just the land and the terrain in Laos, during this time, remember, it was the 60s and the 70s. We didn't know what the weather was like during the days that the pilots were flying their planes. The ground could have been very, very wet with the rainy season, or it could have been just in an area where it was high agriculture area. So ground very, very soft. So the bombs would drop and they would just lodge themselves in the ground. Now, this particular video that I would like to share with you is this just happened last year, where they found a 500-pound bombs during the site that my team and I actually had the opportunity to visit. So I will play the video.
บ้านแกงขะเมะเมืองเซโปดแขวงสวรรณเขตหมู่บ้านน้อยๆของชาวเผ่าบรูตั้งอยู่ตีนภูนางม่านเลดตามสายน้ำเซบังเหกพวกเขามีชีวิตอันเงียบสงบและติดพันกับธรรมชาติในดินแดนแห่งนี้แต่ก็มีเพื่อฮู้เลยว่ามีปีศาจหายนอนอยู่หน้าบ้านของพวกเขามายาวนานกว่า40ปีนั้นคือระเบิดขนาด500ปอนด์ที่มีพลังทำลายล้างสูงถึง 1.5 กิโลเมตรมณฑลและตอนนี้องค์การเก็บกู้ระเบิด The Halo Trust ได้โกดพบและกำลังจะทำลายมันตามวิธีของพวกเขาเพราะระเบิดฝังลึกลงไปในพื้นดินประมาณ1เมตรและอยู่เคอกับหมู่บ้านการเคลื่อนย้ายบ่มขนาดใหญ่นั้นมีความเสี่ยงสูงพวกเขาจึงต้องทำลายกับทีและต้องได้สร้างสิ่งกำบังโดยกระสอบทรายกว่า 20,000 กระสอบเพื่อป้องกันมีแห่งระเบิดทำลายสิ่งปลูกสร้างในชุมชนและต้องใช้เวลาถึง3มื้อในการสร้างบังเกอร์นี้หลังจากสร้างสิ่งกำบังสำเร็จก็อพยพทุกคนออกจากหมู่บ้านและวางแผนการทำลายในทันทีอยู่ในนี้จะมีอยู่14จุดเนาะอันนี้คือเป็นที่เฮาจะไปก่อนการทำลายระเบิดทุกครั้งนั้นพวกเขาต้องได้จัดตั้งทีมรักษาความปลอดภัยอย่างเป็นระบบเพื่อกันคนออกจากรัศมีของแห่งระเบิดเมื่อทุกอย่างเคลียร์ฝ่ายเทคนิคก็จะเดินสายขโนนระเบิดและประกาศสัญญาณยิงรอบสุดท้ายเพื่อเกมนับถอยหลังตอนนี้ทางเบิร์กนั้นเธอสัญญาณว่ากำลังสิต่อแคประเบิดแล้วค่อยต้องฟ้าวออกจากโซนระเบิดต้องห่างจากโซนนั้น 1.5 กิโลเมตรต้องไม่ออกไปจุดหนึ่งบวกกันอุ่นใจเป็นอะไรเปลี่ยนหลังจากหัวหน้าทีมเช็คความปลอดภัยของแต่ละจุดรอบสุดท้ายวินาทีแห่งความระทึกก็ได้เริ่มขึ้นภาพจากโดรนได้แสดงให้เห็นว่ากระสอบทรายกว่า 20,000 กระสอบนั้นได้หมุนละเอียดมีเลยสิ้นดีนั้นแสดงถึงพลังอันมหาศาลในตัวมัน
So I think you get the picture of how tedious it is in order to detonate these bombs, right? And especially a bomb of this size. This one in particular was 500 pounds. All of these little ones that I show you, the bombies, if you find one, you're likely to find more because when they're dropped, they're scattered and they're scattered pretty closely to one another. Right now, of the bombs that are still left, less than 1% has been cleared. And teams of people have to go out in a safe way in order to do this. So it takes a lot of time. I was I was doing a presentation yesterday and someone asked me to give an estimate of how long I believe it would take. And the answer is no one really knows. And there's really, you can't guarantee that all the bombs have been removed. There's an article that was just published 2 weeks ago that, someone found a bomb in the UK from World War II. So these things, when they're dropped, they stay on for a very, very long time. All right. So the bombings did not just destroy homes, but lives and wiped multiple tribal groups off the face of the planet. If you recall the map from earlier, yeah, I'll go back to it. All of these, there were many, many tribal groups living in Laos. As small as Laos is, there's over 170 different ethnic tribal groups, all with their own culture and languages. And, while all this was happening, the US still, like the American people still had no idea until 1971. And this is when there was this huge exodus of people leaving not just Laos, but Southeast Asia as a whole. Now, at the time, the population of Laos was only about 2.2 million people. So imagine 25% of those people having to find new homes, not just within Laos, but also fleeing the country. The bombing, when you really think about it, it had this domino effect on not just people's lives, but all aspects of the people who are still living in Laos. I just wanted to show this slide here. And this is information that we pulled from the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees. As you can tell, people fled to wherever they were able to get into, right? They didn't have the luxury of saying like, I want to live in Japan, I want to live in France. It's wherever they were friendly, whichever country was friendly enough to take in refugees. As you can tell, there's so many different places. When I was first doing research on this, I was a little surprised at some of these different places where there's actually Laotians living there. One of the things that, I would like to point out though, is in 1957, the Act of Care for Humanity, Operation Brotherhood, nicknamed for short, was founded. For nearly 2 decades, 400 Filipino aid workers set up 13 hospitals in Laos, providing so much of the medical care and training that was needed during this time when there was this mass exodus from people from the mountain hill areas, rural part of Laos, coming into the city of Vientiane. Another fun fact, too, and this may not shock you, but the amount of Laotian refugees fleeing that ended up in the US, the majority are concentrated in California, Texas, Virginia, Illinois, and Minnesota. So, which leads to my own family's journey here. So I left Laos when I was 6 years old. But in order to understand why my parents finally decided to uproot our family, even after the war was over, I have to take you back a little bit. So my dad, that's him right there. That I think was just when I graduated high school. My dad was a doctor in Laos. His name is Dr. Sera Koulabdara. He was 14 when the first bomb was dropped. And he was in the capital during that time, just like out on the outskirts. He was living with monks, typical during that time. This is 1964, right? So it was actually 1962 when my dad left the South and went up north. He lived with monks and he ran errands, did all the chores. In exchange, he would get to go to the lycée in Vientiane. So French-run high school. And he was there during this time. And then all of a sudden, 3 blocks away, he hears this explosion and he remembers this as a 14-year-old. Now, all throughout the span of 9 years that the US was raining plane loads of bombs into Laos, My dad saw his friends, saw neighbors, saw fellow villagers lose their limbs, people dying, and people's homes being burnt. That his original plan was actually to become a soccer player like Pele, but he ended up just having this change of heart, and he became a doctor instead. And throughout his whole entire life, he decided to go from village to village and to help with people who have had accidents, either through simple acts like farming or just lighting a fire in order to make a meal. And, one of the memories that I have growing up in Laos was one day when an elderly woman and a little girl about my age during that time came knocking on the door. And I remember the little girl was on crutches and she was missing part of her leg. And I realized that, years later, my dad actually was the doctor who operated on her. And her grandmother just came to our house in order to bring us a bag of rice. Back in those days, it's a barter system. If people didn't have money to pay, my my dad, didn't like he didn't take payments, and people would just come and drop off just random things. So you could read more on my blog. It's just loveiswhy.blog. I write a lot about just memories of my childhood. My father, who you can't tell, has a huge influence on me. And obviously I'm the cute one right here in red with the pigtails. So which leads, fast forward to today. I am so honored to be able to be a part of an organization that is pushing for funding to resolve this issue. Since, as a little girl, I also had to walk through fields that were not cleared. And this is actually the moment where my parents decided that they couldn't take the risks of sending us off to school and not knowing if we would come back in one piece or come back at all. So they decided to move the family to the United States when they were, already in their 30s and like having to find a new life. Now, these images that you see here is actually from the book Voices from the Plain of Jars. And these are collected illustrations and narrative from Laotian refugees. Etch in pencil, pen, crayons, and markers. These accounts are raw, and they're stark, like just reflecting the crude events that shape the reality of these victims' lives during this time. And only a small group of individuals knew that these even existed. And these images are actually the reason why Legacies exist today. This is actually how we were founded. So at the time of our founding in 2004, these drawings were a little over 30 years old, and they were in the office of John Cavanagh, who is the executive director of Institute for Policy Study. John happened to have met our founder, Janapa Kamungsa, and he noted her last name, So pretty much if anyone has like a super long last name, and they're probably Laotian and similar to mine, right? And Kamungsa. So he asked her and she said, yeah, and he said, it's terrible what happened in Laos. And at the time, like Janapa didn't know at all what had happened because she also came as a small child and her parents didn't talk about this. So he handed her these sets of drawings that he and a Laotian colleague of his, Nguyen, collected during the late 60s and 70s and gave it to Janapa. She started doing more digging and she realized that this is actually the reason why the American public realized what was happening in Laos, because Fred Brampton brought these drawings and he testified in front of Congress, like exposing the CIA secrets. Now, fast forward to years and years later, my brother was working in DC and he went to a volunteer event, and that's actually how he met Janapa, and then he introduced me to her. And, if any of you ever have the pleasure of meeting her, you can't say no, and you end up volunteering, and then who knows, eventually working for the organization. So once Legacies was founded, I think, in my opinion, this is when the healing like really begins, right? Because Legacy became the voice of the victims who are still like being harmed today by these explosive remnants of war. War is not over for the people of Laos, and it's not over when a treaty is signed or when the folks who caused the war leave. These are pictures of children who were not even born yet when the war started, or when the war was raging. These are children just from a few years back who are still being injured. I would also be remiss too if I didn't mention, like, in addition to children being harmed from UXO, you may have also come across a New York Times article talking about Agent Orange. There were Agent Orange that were sprayed during this time, mainly in the South, and we're still feeling the effect of those today. I'll have my colleague drop a link to that so you could read a little bit more. What I really, really want to emphasize here is that there's at least 25,000 people who have been killed or injured from unexploded ordnance after the war ended, and 40% of them are children. As a matter of fact, just last month, a group of kids were walking home from school, just 5 children, all under the age of 10, and they stumble upon what looked to them like a little ball. They picked it up, started throwing it around, and 2 were immediately killed on impact, and 3 of them were left severely injured. So what does it mean for those children who are still living like with a missing arm, a missing leg? They're not able to live a normal life anymore, right? So the funding that Legacies advocate for not only goes towards clearance efforts, but it also goes towards providing assistance to people who are living without a limb, who may have become blind, who are experiencing health impediments, right? These are pictures of prosthetics that are used to support people who's missing an arm or a leg. I just want to also, share that some of these prosthetics are not the most advanced ones, right? Like, Laos is several decades behind the rest of the world due to just the impact of war, right? Like, they're not able to progress. So that means that the comfort level of wearing one of these is not like what we would experience here in the United States or Europe. So it's very, very complex, and we're trying to push for more advancements, in just technology and medical equipments for survivors so that they can lead as a normal life as possible. When I was in Laos just last year, I had the opportunity to speak to one. He had an accident. His name is Kak. He had an accident when he was 21 years old. He shared with me that he had suicidal thoughts because he just felt like useless, right? And it was really uncomfortable for him to get used to in the beginning. So mental health is something that we're pushing for because it is not something that is well known in Laos, let alone here, right? Like, there's still a lot of stigma tied to it, but we know that someone who experienced something this traumatic will live for the rest of their life with that trauma. In addition to medical care and just assistance in general with living, we also help push for mind risk education. So this is teaching these children to avoid a bomb when they see it, right? Teaching them the dangers of trying to play around it and being careful while they're walking. This is not the type of curriculum that I would want my own kids if I had them to have to go through, but this is the reality for children in Laos. Now, I'll also point out as well that in addition to teaching children, not in addition, I'm sorry, I mentioned earlier that there's so many different tribal ethnic groups, right? The language barrier is a challenge for a lot of the organizations that's trying to service each of the different regions in Laos. So having to get materials in the right language is also a challenge, but that is something that they're working to try to resolve. But which is why the need for more funding is ever so much important, because the need is so great. Now, I just brought this slide over just as a quick recap of everything that we talked about so far. I do just also want to say that, when you look at it with all the problems that Laos has with UXO, how can it progress like its neighbor when it faces such a huge barrier? One thing that, I would like to highlight, because I think that is something so important, and I really applaud like the government of Laos for setting this up. There's 17 sustainable goals that world leaders recognize as a way to really help countries move out of poverty, helping with education and things that would just help the country be able to take care of itself better. Laos has a special sustainable development goal, and that's SDG 18 for short. And SDG 18 says that Laos wants to eliminate UXO as a barrier to its progress and development by the year 2030. That is very ambitious, right? Now, that does not mean that every single piece of bomb will be removed from Laos, but it says that they'll work to the best of their ability to make sure that the most important, like highly populated areas are clear. Areas where kids are going to school, areas where there's hospital, areas where there's so many families living is clear. And that is absolutely achievable as long as the funding is sustained. And that's why Legacies of War will continue to advocate for more funding so that Laos can achieve this goal and that children can walk to school in safety. Which leads us to the next portion, hope. I have a lot of hope, and especially because of today. Being able to talk to all of you today means so much, because it means that there's people out there that really care, and that's how we get the job done. Like, despite all of Legacy's successes in our past 17 years, there's still so much more to do. I'm so proud that Hillary Clinton was able to visit Laos, and when she visited, funding jumped, right? And then, of course, the most historic moment was when President Obama pledged 90 million for clearance efforts and survivor assistance in 2016. And so that's 90 million split up between 3 years, so 30 million, right? And I'm really proud that we were able to sustain and grow that funding to 40 million this year. But I still believe that we can do better. We'll continue to have our traveling exhibits. We'll continue to have speaking engagement to educate more people. Bring in leaders, journalists, people who have access to a wide range of outlets in order to come and hear our story and learn more. Because it does matter, right? Like, it does matter who helps tell that story. Because if you just depend on the Laotian community, that's only 350,000 people in the United States. Legacies of War, one of the things that I'm most proud of for us too is that we serve as a steering committee member of the US Campaign to Ban Landmine and Cluster Munition Coalition. This is a national group. We know that funding is never guaranteed, and we need allies to really help reiterate our ask and really help push for funding alongside us. Groups like the US Campaign to Ban Landmines, Cluster Munition Coalition, as well as the War Legacies Working Group, help us amplify like our voice on the Hill. I'll also note too that the reason why we're part of the campaign to just ban these weapons of mass destruction is because, I mean, if the bombs were not dropped in the first place, we wouldn't be cleaning this up, right? You know, I'll also share with you just a stat that I just find mind-boggling. And this is where, Brandon, you could drop the link to Titus's blog. Titus, one of our board members, wrote about this earlier this year. The 2021 budget for the defense spending, so this is, you know, military spending, is $753 billion. That's billion with a B. Now, the overall spending of international development aid work, right? Like funding for clearance efforts, for example, like, and not just for Laos, but for all over the world, it's $40 billion. So 753 billion versus 40 billion. That's nothing, right? And I don't think that represents the interests of the broader American public. So this is the reason why, like, we want to push for more sustained funding. And I believe Izzy also mentioned our bill that we're really aiming to pass. And, you know, Senator Baldwin has been doing a great job, but we really need a Republican to help step up and co-sponsor this bill for her, with her, so that when it does go to vote, we would have the support of both sides of the aisle. All right, so, you know, this takes a lot of conversations, right? Like, it is not just us submitting something and it automatically pass. Our team worked tirelessly, roaming the halls of Congress, talking to anyone that would allow us to enter their door. And, you know, this is one of the days that I really enjoyed. I was out with our chief of staff, and it was raining, so you guys get to see a footage of us being underground in the Senate building.
Where are we right now? We are underneath Rayburn. So that we could we don't have to be in the rain. While we're going to our meetings. Where are we right now? We are underneath Rayburn.
So if you all ever have any interest, or if you're ever in DC, would love to bring you to one of our meetings with us. And you know, I think, you know, it's really unique when we go there. You know, we want to tell them like the story of the people, and really let them see, you know, the people that really care about this issue and are pushing forward for it. Alina and I often wear our sin when we're on the Hill, and might I say, you know, it's tough work, but someone has to do it. Like wearing this plus the heels, it's you get a lot of attention, which is good for us, because that means they allow us to come and talk to them. All right. So before I wrap up, you know, I also want to reiterate that all the funds that we advocate for does not come to Legacies. We want to be honest, like honest stewards in this, and honest partners. We have the money sent directly into Laos to fund the organizations that are doing the demining work, mine risk education, as well as survivor assistance. Our team is only a team of 3, and when we're lucky, we have interns like Anna be part of our team. We run under a shoestring budget of $350,000 a year. The mission is complex, you know, as you can see. It's going to take a lot of volunteers, you know, a lot of our countless volunteers, board members, our working board members who are along with us, or with us all along the way. And I think this poem is actually written by Kiana Arrows, who is an intern at the Boise State. She's now currently working with one of our partners. Legacies is trying to build this exhibit in Idaho, because a museum is being built there in 3 years. And what she wrote, I think, really captures the spirit of all of us coming together and really just rallying behind this cause so that we can get Laos clear and within our lifetime, right? You might just feel that you're just one person, what can you do? But you're one person, but combined, we are the ocean. So I just wanted to leave you with this poem. I won't read it to you. I know you can all read yourself, but I do think that this really, really captures the essence of all of us coming together and making sure that it does happen. So thank you so much. I hope that, I'll see some of you following our work, signing up for our newsletters, social media, joining us at our upcoming events. And who knows, one of you could be a future intern with us as well. So our next events that we have that I would love for you to be a part of is a screening of The Most Secret Place on Earth. And this is a film directed by a German film director, Mark Eberly. I know Anna included this in her email to you all, but I just wanted to show you a preview of the movie, the trailer of the movie. And it is free to register, so would love to see all of you there on Thursday.
What the plane of jars and what it's a symbol of is how those people on the vague frontiers, those people in the third world, those people we never see and never know about and never hear, can be vaporized, wiped off the face of the earth without people back here even knowing about it.
What we had to do was to tell them that you could do it in this area because there were no villages. We wiped it off the face of the planet. We drove tens of thousands of people into becoming refugees. We inflicted, we don't know how many dead. There's no counting.
พอดีมอบอยู่ที่มิเตควันนะเตควันกับลูกที่ดินนี่นะขึ้นมาผู้ที่บ่ทันเข้าคุกมันก็เป็นที่ดินทันตีหน้านะว่าจีนพูดได้จีนจีโอก็อยากแต่มอลิจีนปากกระป๋องคนเดีเอ็มมันจะคือมัวสต้องมัวมันนอนที่เจที่เจียเนี่ยลี
Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And I hope to see you at the movie night on Thursday, as well as another event that Anna can share the link later on. But you have my contact information, and Brandon, who's also on the call here, and Alina, who's our chief of staff. Please reach out to us and stay in touch. Thank you so much. Back to you, Anna.
Could you stop recording and give me the host?
Oh, yes.